autocratic elites really so great at running things? And then the second thing I would say is the war in Iraq. Not so much, not an economic issue, but a really big one in terms of, are the people who we have been electing really the right kind of people to run stuff? And so I think that at the end of the day, the reason that, big groups of people in Western industrialized societies are questioning the way their liberal democracies were run is because the way their liberal democracy was run wasn't really working for them. And so in some ways, this is kind of how democracy is supposed to work. People are saying, you know what, you weren't delivering results, and if you can't deliver results, I'm going to try something else. Why am I ultimately hopeful? Because I think liberal democracy actually is the best way to deliver better results for exactly the people who are dissatisfied today. And it is the job of those of us who believe in liberal democracy, first and foremost political leaders, but also all the public servants here, and I would even say journalists too. We have to come up with better answers and better results.
Do you think, though, that this goes structurally actually quite a lot deeper in the sense that your own book, Plutocrats, pointed out that these trends have been developing for longer than the financial crisis. It began beyond
1970s, probably.
I was in the airport at Heathrow on Saturday. I was looking for some sort of homework type books to read before I came over for this session. And I didn't find very much, but what I did hit on was, in the bestseller list, a book by Yanis Varoufakis, his sort of epistle to his daughter, I don't know if you've seen it, about capitalism. And he says the market is an conspiracy. But no, the point I'm making here, apart from the fact that I can't speak, is that maybe this is a kind of crisis of social market capitalism, and I'm going to continue to be the skeptical, gloomy journalist, where it's hard.
He's actually a lot of fun in regular life.
It's hard to see what the solution to that is right now. I mean, in Britain we have Jeremy Corbyn, who's calling for a dramatic swing to the left, which doesn't appear well, we'll find out, but there's a lot of doubt about that. So if liberal democracy is going to get wheels again, what is going to be what's the engine?
So I do think this question about the economy and capitalism is a really important part of it. And I'm tempted to start my answer, Hugh, by reminding us all of that great Churchill line, that democracy is the worst system except for all the others. And I think I would say the same thing about the market economy. As you know, I have a particular perspective because I actually lived in the actual Soviet Union, not post-Soviet Union, actual Soviet Union. My children find this astonishing. They knew I was old, but they're like, really? You were alive then? I lived there as a student. I lived in Kyiv in 1988-89. And I have to say, that was like the best vaccination against any fantasies about how central planning is the solution to our problems. They spent a long time, the Soviets, trying to make it work, and it really didn't. It was terrible, and terrible not only in the restriction of liberty of people, but just in the material lives of people. I still remember, when they had sausages and butter in the gastronome, we students would all tell each other, and we would leave our classes to go line up. So this is not really a good alternative, and I think it's really important to say that to younger generations who maybe don't remember so clearly. Having said that, I think it is absolutely right to be clear that 21st century capitalism is not working well enough. It is working extremely well as a machine for delivering ever higher returns to the 0.01%. It is working extremely well as a winner-take-all economy. But I think there are some real structural issues in the ability of 21st century capitalism to deliver a comfortable, secure life to the broad middle class. And failure to do that will mean failure to sustain democracy, because democracy really is only going to work when the broad middle class in our societies is not only prosperous, but secure, confident about the future, if people feel they can retire with dignity and comfort, and they feel their kids are going to get a good shot. What do I think the problems are? I think there are sort of two aspects to it, broadly speaking. One is, I think it's a reality, actually, of how, of the combined and mutually reinforcing forces of globalization and the technology revolution to create these very powerful winner-take-all cycles. And we see it in particular industries where increasingly you have to be the top company or the second top company, and you get the lion's share of the gains. We see it in professions where the people at the very, very top do a lot better than everybody else. And I think that there is something structural that is driving that, where, the combination of the technology revolution and the ability to scale and the network effect, which is multiplied by globalization, because now you can scale over the whole world, it just is tending to create these sorts of forces. And I think, so that's sort of the first kind of structural issue which is there. I think we shouldn't be naive and overlook the fact that there have been political decisions which you could take or choose not to take, which have tended to further reinforce that tendency. And those political decisions have tended to be influenced by the winners. And the winners, the more they win, the more political power they have, the more they're able to push us more in that direction. And to give you one example, in order to be a little bit less abstract, unions. I think one of the things that, both academic research and experience of all our countries has shown is where you have strong unions, workers are able to, get a bigger share of those returns. And in countries where unions have been weakened, you have even more powerful winner-take-all tendencies. So that's one reason I'm very pro-union, and our government is really pro-union. But hang on. Yep. But then there is, just to be quick, I'll finish quickly with you. So there are those sort of structural forces. And then there are political decisions. And I think we have a delicate balancing act, because I certainly am not a Luddite. And I am not an advocate of autarky. So I think, speaking for Canada, we don't want to stop the technology revolution. We want to be really, really good at it. That's why we're very proud of our prowess at AI, for example. We don't want to stop globalization. Canada wants to be even more connected with the world. So if that is the case, and if you believe, as I do, that there are some structural characteristics of globalization, the technology revolution, which are going to tend to lean in the direction of more inequality and of hollowing out of the middle class, then I think what you need are political solutions. And I think you need, politics needs to take on itself a responsibility for ensuring that the 21st century capitalist engine, the great growth and prosperity, which it does deliver. And that's another thing to remember. Like, we actually have more stuff and are better at producing stuff than any previous generation. In a weird way, it's part of our problem, is that we're able to produce stuff so easily. My dad is a farmer. He's 74 years old. He farms 6,000 acres, and it's my dad and like 2 or 3 other people and they're not even there the whole time. It's just at peak periods. Think about that. And in a way, it's great because that's why food is so cheap. In another way, that's a lot of jobs that don't exist. I go to a lot of factories now because of my job, Hugh, and I actually used to at the FT as well. And I was recently in the Sioux, and I went to Algoma, and it is striking how few people there are now making steel. One of those like quintessential industries of the industrial age. So it's not really so much a problem of the economy isn't able to produce the things we all need to live in comfort and prosperity. It's that we're not very good at being sure that all of us get enough of the fruits of that. And what makes it particularly challenging is, I think, none of us want to stifle innovation. So we want to find a way to be innovative societies, to be societies that embrace the technology revolution, even as we are societies that know how to share. Yeah. And that's really a big challenge.
Yeah, and we probably don't want to get completely bogged down in economics, but nonetheless, it seems to me that the logical kind of conclusion of what you said is that we have to look hard at essentially regulation in its broadest term. And that maybe what's gone wrong is that we've not regulated in a way that has, or rather, we may need to have a kind of regulation change, regulation upheaval in the way, or revolution like we had in the famous antitrust day in terms of the tech companies. We may need to look at our taxation structures very, very carefully. And these are very hard things to do. And we may need to look, I think, at corporate governance. There were very striking figures out a week ago from the US which showed that the median CEO pay in the United States, the ratio to the median worker in the company, was 254 to 1. And that was just the median. And there were famous examples, the Bob Iger of Disney, 1,424 times the salary of his median worker. So, and that's where it gets crunchy, because that's hard politics to do, it seems to me, to break up the tech companies or to regulate them in a way, to really get them to pay taxes and to have a tax structure. Thomas Piketty said, well, let's tax it, whatever he said, 70%. When François Hollande tried to do that in France, he got in terrible trouble.
I want to offer two thoughts about that. And I agree, I'm actually going to offer three thoughts about that. I think you're exactly right. And the first thought is that parallel with the trust-busting era is a very good and important one, partly because it's hopeful. I think one of the things that's important for us to recognize, even as we look at the challenges which we face, which are formidable, is to remember human beings have faced something pretty similar before and figured it out. I think the challenges of 21st century capitalism are not dissimilar to the challenges of late 19th, early 20th century capitalism. The parallels are kind of eerie, actually. You had a technology revolution then, you had globalization then, you had tremendous amount of innovation, tremendous wealth being created, but you also had a rise of a super elite and a lot of people being hollowed out. The good news about that parallel is, at the end of the day, we all figured it out. We had, in our different countries, different versions of the New Deal. We created social safety nets. We created a way to share the prosperity of the Industrial Revolution with all of our people. And we kind of, invented liberal democracy properly in that process. So that's the good news. The bad news is, before we figured it out, we had to live through the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, and the Bolshevik Revolution. So let's hope we can figure it out more quickly this time and without the midwife of trauma. But it can be done, and I think really the challenge is very comparable. The other thing I would say, Hugh, about the political difficulty of the challenge is I think part of the answer needs to be getting the winners in society to really understand that a solution is in their interest too. And I represent a riding. We call them ridings in Canada.
Yeah. I know.
So I represent a riding called University Rosedale. And Rosedale is one of the most prosperous neighborhoods in Canada.